Hello, everybody. I'm Melody Span Cooper. I am the chair and CEO of Midway Broadcasting Corporation. You all may not know our corporate name, but you'll know this. It's our flagship station, WVON, which is we own, as well as WRLL 1450 and our new OTT digital platform, Von TV. I'm excited to host this dynamic panel today and a discussions we're calling From Reparations to Redistricting, the Intersection of Voting Rights and Economic Equity. The Chicago Urban League's 2021 Summit is a convening on building wealth in the Black community. Research shows that on average, 1,700 new businesses are opening every day in America. 1,700. While the League's recent research highlights Black business ownership as one path to economic equity, we know that a number of factors contribute to the long-standing racial wealth gap in the United States, starting with centuries of enslaved Black people performing free labor that enriched white slave owners and their descendants. Political representation also plays a part. Introducing and enacting policies that can help bridge the economic divide requires elected officials with the will and commitment to push for them. Recently, we've seen some signs of progress. In March, Evanston became the first U.S. city to approve a form of reparations for Black residents. The U.S. Congress is considering a bill, H.R. 40, which is co-sponsored by one of our panelists today, Congressman Danny Davis, that would establish the commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. And the volume is turning up on the call for reparations. All eyes have been on Tulsa this week as we've commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And we cannot have a conversation in Chicago without acknowledging the efforts of the late, great Conrad Worrell, who was part of the NCOBRA movement and chair of the National Black United Front, who, along with people like Alderman Dorothy Tillman and others, took the call for reparations to the United Nations decades ago. We've also seen barriers to progress. Since last year's presidential election, 14 states have enacted 22 new laws that make it harder to vote. A report released earlier this month by the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University's School of Law identified an additional 61 bills advancing in state legislatures that would restrict absentee or mailing in voting, purge voter rolls, or target voter ID requirements. Meanwhile, here in Illinois, the recent loss of a congressional seat requires redistricting, a practice that has often meant redrawing district maps in ways that dampen political power for Black voters. And while there is much talk about the dwindling Black population in the city of Chicago, it's important to note that the largest ethnic populations leaving the state of Illinois were Asians, followed by white people, by Latinos, and then African Americans in the latest census data. So I just always like to give people a fact check on what's really happening. This panel is so dynamic this morning. Joining us is Nicholas Cummings, who's the Corporation Counsel and City Attorney for the city of Evanston, who you know has made history as the first city in the United States who has passed legislation regarding reparations. Cam Howard is the national male co-chair of NCOBRA, which is the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Dr. Lionel Kimball joins us from what we deem as Chicago's UNCF school, Chicago State University, where he's an assistant professor of history, and State Senator L.G. Sims out of the 17th District, who covers Chicago, Chatham area, and much of the Southland, including areas like Calumet City, Burnham, Sauk Village, Linwood, and a lot of other cities on the South End. I don't think Congressman Davis has joined us yet from the 7th Congressional District, but gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with you, Dr. Kimball. Since the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation and the passing of the 13th Amendment more than 150 years ago, various calls have been made for reparations for Black Americans, largely to no avail, except for Evanston. Over the last year, there has been increased conversations and activity around this, right? Well, why do you think the movement for reparations is gaining momentum now?
You are muted.
Dr. Kimball, you're muted. Try it again. We still can't hear you. So while you work that out, why don't we move to Cam Howard of Cobra? Maybe you can tackle that. You've been on the front line of this issue.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that have added to the momentum that we're seeing right now. One of the first major pieces that reignited the reparations movement was Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in 2014 in the Atlantic. That put it, mainstream. It had been on the fringes. There have been a lot of groups, Cobra, who is part nationalist, part, mainstream Black community. It's an amalgamation of who we are. But it had been seen as a fringe movement, a fringe issue. But with Ta-Nehisi Coates' article, it moved it into the mainstream of white America. And then the data, that has been in existence. We're in an era of big data. We're able to demonstrate clearly the inequities, the disparities, the police killings, the video cameras of all that has been happening to us as a people, have all strengthened what we have been saying for decades, and in fact centuries, that the harms of enslavement, Jim Crow segregation still affects us. The country's laws are still such that we are the first to be, fired when there's a problem, in this country. And so, this country is not able to hide from the fact that our existence in this country is still pretty much influenced by the historical harms committed against us.
Yeah. So, Cam, I know that this movement is afoot, and I think what Ta-Nehisi has done, the article in the New York Times, the 1619, there's just been a continuous movement towards it. But how do you think that Black Americans, have we done enough to contribute to this movement as a call for reparations?
Certainly every poll that I've been in Cobra for 16 years, and Cobra's been around for 34 years. And every poll that we polled of Black Americans, the majorities, not nowhere less than 65% of Blacks are favored reparations. Right now, 85% of Blacks in a Huffington Post poll believe that Jim Crow segregation affects our lives. So Blacks as a whole, we've been totally in support of this issue, knowing that, deeply in our hearts that we're still affected by enslavement. When it comes to moving the issue forward, we haven't had the type of activism that we need. And so that's the second component. First was getting our people to understand it is necessary, it's owed, it's due to us. And then, getting us to become more active into pursuing it. And certainly the local issue, the local push by Evanston ignited a lot of activists in this area. So
yeah, it really did. Before we go to Evanston with Attorney Cummings, Professor Kimball, I want to go back to you and talk about what do you believe is behind this new movement and how it's gaining momentum about reparations, considering that the Emancipation Proclamation was 150 years ago. Why now? Still not hearing you. I'm so sorry. We're still not hearing you. I'll let the technicians help out on that. Let's go to Evanston because it's the center of the universe for reparations. I don't know how you all got that done, Attorney Cummings, but I'm so glad that you did. And it would be great if you'd share some insight because some people may be hearing this for the first time today. And we think about Evanston, and people don't realize that Evanston had a Black population in it in the early 1900s. Can you give us a little history of that and then talk about how you all have pioneered this effort?
Sure. So Evanston had a relatively it welcomed a lot of black individuals from the South during the Great Migration in the early 1900s. But as that population began to swell, much like other northern cities, the majority population in Evanston wasn't really appreciative of uh, the new neighbors, right? So the city began to enact ordinances and zoning codes and began to have a develop a city plan that forced its black residents into very specific areas that ultimately the federal government, real estate agents, and banks deemed undesirable. Uh, and so we even had evidence of the city forming a commission. And I really believe there was a recent Bloomberg article that highlighted one of our residents, his family was a victim of this, where we had a commission that literally would move people's homes or tear them down under the guise of urban blight, which ultimately just helped expand the Evanston's downtown area. So that's we have that evidence of that, and there was also, to be quite frank, and I always tell people this, Evanston had the political will to get it done. And that's
Mm,
usually the first step, is having the political will to want to do this. So in 2002, I believe it was Judge Lionel Baptiste, they had the resolution that acknowledged slavery and support for HR 40. And then in 2019, they passed another resolution that actually created a fund to be able to dedicate to reparations based upon the marijuana recreational use tax. And then most recently in March of 2021, there was the resolution that was passed that approved the first program to use those funds from the marijuana program. So it's always been about political will to get it done. And that's why we haven't really seen much traction or movement elsewhere, because there isn't that political will, at least in Washington, D.C.,
yeah.
and certainly maybe in other cities and states. There hasn't been that political will to achieve this.
Yeah, but Attorney Cummings, it has not been a perfect battle for you guys at all. I think I saw something earlier this week, right? And you all are considering reparations through, I think it's affordable housing that you all are financing, maybe through vouchers of, like, I don't want to say vouchers, but $25,000 um, uh, I think, like grants to homeowners of Evanston, and you're getting a lot of pushback. So tell us some of the things you all have experienced since you all have started this.
So incidentally, and I think this is something that we will talk about in this panel, is what is reparations supposed to look like, right? And incidentally, the limits of Evanston's policy are directly related to the limits placed on municipalities by the 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court of the United States. So it'll be up to Congress to tell the court what a race-based policy should look like, and simply pass a law granting reparations. But Evanston's program was designed uh, to try and give the people who will be recipients the best benefit of the award, right? Um,
Hmm.
I've been in talks with various different individuals about cash payment, because that's what everybody wants, direct cash payment. Well, unless it's classified a certain way, the city doesn't have the authority to exempt it from, taxation, judgments, and liens. There are certain things that, if you have on your back, and you may even owe the city money, right? So there are certain things we couldn't exempt it from unless it's classified a certain way, and those talks will continue once Evanston's reparations committee is seated, and I believe that Mr. Howard will be participating in that process as well. But once that committee is seated, and we can try and look at some of those answers to some of those criticisms. But right now, it's just a matter of trying to develop programming that's within the framework that the Constitution and the Supreme Court allows.
Hmm.
Ironically, the 14th Amendment was passed to try and help us, and since it's been used as a sword against us, anytime we try and get uh, equal, it's
Yeah,
used as,
yeah,
as a stopgap to say, well, you can't become equal based on race because the 14th Amendment says you can't do it. So,
yeah. And that's the pushback you've been getting from a lot of conservative organizations who have showed up in Evanston to really fight this legislation and to put a
absolutely.
stop. Yeah, yeah. And so, what kind of I know you're on the front line of that too. Are they pending? Are more coming? What will be your line of defense? Because I can't imagine if they see a window, it's going to open up the floodgates. How do you plan to handle that?
So I really can't talk so much about that, but I will say that it's really the sharks been circling. There haven't been any lawsuits filed because the program hasn't been enacted, but we have seen a lot of FOIA requests for information to try and see what it is that fueled our program. And the city of Evanston has been very transparent about the program. It's not as if you need to file a FOIA request. You can go to the city's website and look on the reparations link, and all of the evidence that we have is there. The meetings were all public. They were recorded. You can watch the meetings. So we've seen some of those sort of threats and the shark circling the water, but no action just yet. So I am anticipating, and it will be interesting, but I gotta keep everything else close to the chest.
Yeah.
If I can speak to that, Melanie.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Evanston is a microcosm of the entire reparations movement in this country. And so we know that, the attacks that happen to Evanston is going to happen to every place, every city, state, and even the federal government in regards to us administering or directing reparative resources to our community. And so we're engaged in the legal battle. We've assembled some pro bono national pro bono legal assistance for this effort. We have the African American Human Redress Network, which is a collaboration with the Howard University Thurgood Marshall Law Center and the Columbia University Human Rights Center. So they're partnering with us to develop the type of defenses that Attorney Cummins stated that we're developing to assist us in this effort.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So one of the criticisms, just back to Evanston real quickly, one of the criticisms about the reparations bill in Evanston is that it is limited to housing and that money will be paid to the lenders rather than directly to the residents. Attorney Cummings.
So yeah, and that goes back to, so it's a two-part issue there. So reparations at a local level has to be related to the discriminatory actions of the city or the entity. And
Sure.
Evanston's biggest sin was housing discrimination. So that's why it's related specifically to housing. And as long as we are confined by the Supreme Court of the United States precedent requiring a solution to be narrowly tailored to a significant government interest, this is what we have. And insofar as directly paying the recipients versus paying to some other third party, whether it be a lender, whether it be a contractor, because it is allowed for to do home repair. Again, it goes to the issue of making sure that the maximum benefit is received. So again, unless the funds are classified a certain way, those dollars are then subject to all kinds of other issues. I can't simply, unless it's a gift or unless it's a redress, like a settlement or judgment, sure. It's subject to outside tentacles to try and get that money. Exactly. Yeah. So in an effort to try and make sure that everybody got the maximum benefit, we said, okay, look, we will just pay it directly to, if you need to pay your mortgage down, we'll pay it directly to the lender. If you want to buy a home, we will, provide it directly at closing. And to be honest, every other government program that does this is exactly how it works. It goes directly to, the closing table, or it goes directly to the contractor. The government very rarely will give you the money to pay somebody else. Yeah. The government says, fine, give me the receipt, we'll pay it. And so that's the way that this program is structured as well.
Okay. So Cam, in reparations in Evanston is around housing, but what are some current ideas that you at NCOBRA are considering or that's afoot regarding how Black Americans can be compensated for reparations?
So we are not against reparations in the form of compensation or check. However, we know that is clearly not going to be what we determine is reparations in full, and that is whatever projects are necessary to get us to wholeness. We have identified historically that there are 5 major injury areas that any reparations settlement or proposal must address. That's the area of criminal punishment, the nation's laws that have us disproportionately in the prisons around this country. The George Floyd law is part of that, but even more so than that has to take place in the area of criminal punishment. The area of economic and wealth, poverty is one area, with business grants and things like that have to occur, more housing grants, the area of education, and the area of health. We saw with COVID that our health profile is very bad in this country across a lot of areas, mental and physical. We have a tremendously compromised health profile in this country. And finally, in the area of our peoplehood, understanding that for wholeness to happen, we have to have strong families and we have to have strong communities. And one of the attacks on our family has been the attack on the Black male, and particularly leaving the Black male out of the employment, out of the labor force. We know that labor force participation is the key criteria to marriage for Black men, white men, Hispanic men, all men. And if Blacks are disproportionately kept out of the labor force, then we're going to have 50 to 40%, 30% marriage rates, two-parent family rates, which we have. And so when we see reparations, we see it as full repair, wholeness, and a complete autonomous, self-sufficient community. And it's going to take a lot of projects, programs, and maybe several generations to achieve that. And that's why we're pushing so hard for the federal legislation, which is developed or designed to craft the type of proposals that are necessary to get us to that level of repair.
Are there any? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Attorney Cummings.
I was going to say that Kim points out a very critical piece is that it can't really be government alone. You talked about employment, for example. That's private industry. And the only folks that are going to have the influence to get private industry to contribute to this movement is going to be the federal government. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's a lot on the plate, though, Cam. That 5-pillar dimension to reparations, it will require more than just the government, getting involved to make Black America whole. And so I'm wondering, you will get pushback from individuals who say, why not just a financial payout? And that it has happened for others. Why not just a financial payout as a way to look at making, at least closing the wealth gap, which is so much part, right, of the disparity in this country, of why we can't get equity. And so how do you get a buy-in on all of those pillars and expect to do it in our lifetime? That's amazing.
Right. So there is a model that exists internationally. That model is the model of full reparations. It's an international model that says that any reparations, the outcome of reparations must be, quote, to wipe out all consequences of the crimes, wipe out all consequences of harms. And, that is the goal of the reparations that we seek as well, is that we wipe out all the consequences of 246 years of enslavement, 100 years of Jim Crow, 60 plus years of post-Jim Crow discrimination, terrorist attacks on our community. The model of full reparations, which begins with cessation and guarantees of non-repetition, acts of restitution, which is, the health and education and economic development type of initiatives. Compensation is part of full reparations, and we're not leaving that out. It's wrote into HR 40 that the commission must determine what amounts of compensation, who should get it, et cetera, and satisfaction, how to return our dignity to us as a result of the crimes that were been committed, and rehabilitation for the heart, mind, and spirit damage. So there is a model that exists that can point the way for us to get the type of repair and healing that we need. As Attorney Cummings stated, there has to be the political will, and we must educate our people to know that we are owed all of this. It's not something that we, should just allow for a check or some token symbolism to be handed down. A check is necessary, but complete wholeness is what we seek and what our ancestors always desired.
And how long do you think it would take in order for this to be fully enacted? There is a sense of desperation around where we are, right, as a people in this country. And based on that, how long do you think it would take?
Best case scenario, we get an executive order, HR 40, within the next few months. Best case scenario. The commission would be out for 18 months, probably take 90 days to seat the commission. That would take us into September, October. Commission would be out 18 months. So by December of 2023, we should have a report with proposals, with dollar amounts attached to then go back to Congress. And hopefully, we'll be able to push that. All of this depends on us continuing to vote as well, because we have to have these lawmakers in place. So, all of this is dependent on our collective activity. And so by 2024, 2025, we should be seeing some redress. That's the time. That's the best case scenario of time frame. And then that redress is going to take, many years to prove itself to be, an initiative that actually leads to repair.
Yeah.
And Melody, Cam says, he mentioned redress, which is one of the key terms here, because I think all of the conversation politically up to this point has been about equity and not restitution. So as far as, there's been alleged removal of barriers to allow us to try and be equal. Like we have the 14th Amendment I talked about earlier. We have the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all these things to try and help us become equal, but never has there been redress or restitution. And I think the conversation needs to go from equity to restitution, and then we might get more traction.
Wow, that is powerful. Professor Kimball, are you ready?
Now.
Oh, there we go.
The great thing about e-learning is you have 5 laptops running around the house somewhere. So.
That's right. That's so right. I'm glad that you're finally here. We've been
Thank you.
Incredible conversation about reparations, and you're coming in at a dynamic time because Attorney Cummings and both Cam were making a powerful argument. I'm not as versed on the whole issue of reparations being beyond the financial part of it, right?
But I completely agree with Attorney Cummings, because that's one of the thoughts I was having in my mental pre-meeting, because we have to move past equity into some form of justice, right? And I think that's really the larger argument that people are making now. One of my professional organizations, we were one of the sponsors of the Tulsa Rising documentary, and we hosted one of the many nationwide screenings of it. And we had a conversation with our national president, who's a professor at Harvard University. And one of the things that we were talking about was, can this renewed attention, which is being paid to Tulsa nationally, but also there's a huge movement here. A colleague of mine at Western Illinois, Peter Cole, is spearheading an initiative to let us all remember the 1919 Chicago race riot, right? So when we talk about, racial terrorism, right, and the history of racial terrorism in this country, we can't really discount these new voices which are entering into the conversation, after, Trayvon, Michael Brown, and Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and the whole Black Lives Matter, movement, right? I think that having these different voices enter into this conversation with the elders like Conrad Worrell, like Dorothy Tillman, like VP Franklin, and others, I think that does a lot for this current movement, because we're bringing in this new generation of activists who are really trying to have conversations about these things. Just to go back to one of the things with Attorney Cummings, I had a colleague. Her name was Doria Johnson, she was a PhD candidate at Northwestern. She recently passed away, but she was doing a fantastic dissertation on housing discrimination in Evanston, right? So we had these new voices entering into this conversation, which I think is always a good thing for the Black freedom struggle, right? We see those generational shifts, for this movement, for reparations, for inclusion in America. And I think we're at this moment now in which these young people are really entering into this and developing their own political ideologies after some of these current racial violence events that they're experiencing. So
Yeah. You came in at a dynamic time because I just asked the question, how long? Young people are not very patient, right? They're looking for the sprint versus the marathon. And Cam was talking about, from a federal level, when you pull all the pieces together that will take that needs to happen in order for not only equity but restitution to fully happen, you're looking at 2024. Is that realistic? Do you think, Professor Kimmel, that we could be looking at some serious movement around this, somewhere towards the middle of this decade?
I think that's quite plausible. I mean, we're at a moment. I don't think we should underestimate the statement that President Biden made the other day, right? And really setting the tone for a national agenda. But we think about 4 years of 2024. In the grander scheme of things, I think people will say that's a long time. I'm a historian. I deal in in decades as opposed to years. I think 2024 is reasonable. I think that there's this political momentum that is being developed now because of the high profile arguments for reparations, for inclusion, about the way we teach American history and what it really means to be in this country. And I find it, if the left is smart, they would make it a 2024 issue.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to. Dr. Kimball is correct, but the fear of the as they like to say, the blue collar white voting bloc, it will never ever be front and center. It came up during the presidential primaries, absolutely, but you saw it got pushed back to the back as we got closer and closer to the election. So he's absolutely correct. It would be a smart political play, but there's always this fear that the people who switched and voted for Donald Trump in 2016, they are more important to the political futures of some of those in power.
Yeah.
I don't know anything that will be more of a lightning rod for them than an issue of reparations for Black America. But you know what? I've never seen the righteous forsaken, so I'm going to stick with the plan. I think we can get this done. This conversation is from reparations to redistricting, and now we're joined by State Senator LG Sims. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Sims.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. And I hope you've been listening to this dynamic conversation we've been having. But Illinois has lost one, speaking of politics, Illinois lost one congressional seat based on population decline that was revealed in the 2020 census that triggered the redrawing of Illinois elections map at the state and congressional levels. A new state district map has already been given, I understand, to Governor Pritzker. What considerations have been given to racial equity during this state remapping process?
Well, first, thank you, Melody, for hosting today's discussion, and to the Urban League for having it. This is a very important discussion. I was so impressed to hear the discussion about reparations and the discussion of equity, because that's really what, as we focused on producing the map for the upcoming 10-year cycle, as we're required to do by the Illinois Constitution, that was one of our focuses. We wanted a map that was fair and reflect the diversity of our state. So we had over 50 public hearings where we talked to communities across the state, from the very most northern part of the state of Illinois to the very most southern part of the state of Illinois, talking to communities of interest about what it is and what's important to them and what do they want to see as their representatives. So as I was listening to the discussion about reparations, when you have individuals who reflect the ideals and ideas of their communities, you will see these discussions have the ability to not just get lip service, but to have action. That's why the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus recently passed a 4-pillared strategy addressing systemic racism. If you did not have elected officials in office who have the ear and the desire to respond to the issues affecting communities, we would not have been able to pass those pro-reform initiatives dealing with criminal justice reform and education and healthcare and economics. So that's that lens. We wanted to, as we prepared the map for in the 2021 session, we came at it with looking at it through that equity lens and looking at it through the diversity of our great state, recognizing that it's important that communities of interest have their seat at the table, so that they have the ability to reflect the ideas of the individuals who are represented in those districts.
Yeah. So I know that we had an arduous 2020 census, Senator Sims, and doing it in the middle of a pandemic was just crazy, right? But it happened all over the country. How much does that play? How much impact did that have on this current session and you all's ability to get things done on behalf of Black Illinoisans?
Absolutely. Last year in the 2020 spring legislative session, we started off the session with all of these ideas that individuals had about introducing legislation to impact their communities, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, it changed the focus of the legislative session entirely. So we went from having ideas about economics and criminal justice reform and regulatory changes and all those types of things to addressing the pandemic and making sure that we had thousands of Illinoisans who lost their lives to this insidious disease. So we wanted to make sure we were providing for resources that would allow for a proper public health response. And so some of the ideas that we had to put off until this year. So this year we had a number of items that would come up, that we did not get to address last year. But what was most important, and one of the things that I am very proud of, was a budget that we passed, we recently passed, and on its way to the governor's desk, that reflects those priorities of investing in education, investing in healthcare, investing in public safety, and making sure that we have a public health response that prepares us to come out of the pandemic, but come out of the pandemic, not only come out of the pandemic, but come out of the pandemic stronger. So we put into all those things we couldn't get done in the 2020 session. We focused on those in the 2021 session. So it was we did, as I mentioned earlier, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus's 4 pillars. We continue to advance those pillars, because I have often said that reform is a journey, not a destination. So just because we passed those 4 pillars did not mean we were done. So we continue to focus on strengthening those pillars, implementing those pillars, but also building on them. And then that's why you have from the maps that we just passed through the legislature, we looked at them through that equity lens. What does it mean to have true diversity? What does it mean to have representatives and elected representatives who reflect the communities that they represent, who will speak up to and have those those difficult conversations about what our communities are looking for? And that was the focus of the 2021 spring legislative session. And I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do to continue working on behalf of black people and on behalf of all Illinoisans, but most importantly, ensuring that we are investing in creating a better quality of life for those who can't speak up for themselves.
Can you share with us, and I love the progress that you all are making there. What is one big win that you could tell people who are watching this about that Black Illinoisans can see and know it's coming like right away from this session? That's tangible, that we can see. I know you're working, and I know it's all relative. Don't get me wrong. But that thing, Senator Sims, that you say, yeah, we knocked this out the ballpark for our people. And as a result, this is what's going to take place.
I am extremely excited about some of the work that we have done on just across the board, but particularly as it relates to affordable housing. There are programs that we have created. So in partnership with the federal government, committed significant resources to the state of Illinois, over $8 billion coming directly to the state of Illinois, but billions of dollars to the state, billions of dollars to local governments, billions of dollars to local health departments, et cetera. But what I would say for Black Illinoisans across the state, there are significant resources put into this budget for affordable housing programs and affordable housing funding, but also to address dilapidated buildings, vacant properties, the rehabilitation thereof, making sure that we have the ability to improve the quality of our communities. As I drive around my district all the time, I see buildings that we would love to have rehabbed, but not by speculators, but by homeowners who are going to come into those buildings, rehab them, put them back into effective use, have a family live there who is going to love that home and going to come into that home and take full advantage of the opportunities of home ownership. So that's one thing that I am extremely excited about, the affordable housing components that are built into the fiscal 22 budget, and then some of the resources that we've set aside to make that happen.
Yeah, two things on that point. I saw an article in Cranes that talked about how red hot the Chicago homeowner, the housing market is. And I couldn't believe that. You would think that what all that is going on, that the real estate market wouldn't be as strong as it is. But secondly, I opened the program talking about depopulation of the state of Illinois, which led to us losing the congressional seat, Senator Sims. And surprisingly, we always talk about the how many African Americans are moving out of Chicago and out of Illinois, but leading, according to the census, the number one ethnic group leaving Illinois was Asians, followed by whites, followed by Latinos, and then African Americans, right? And so Illinois is losing amongst all demographics, and the thing that everyone says is the reason is opportunity, that there's no real opportunity. So, and when I say opportunity, I mean employment opportunities, that the job growth in the state of Illinois. So while the housing piece is an important one, and is so dynamic. Can we talk a little bit about the employment opportunities that you all may be looking at, and especially how they impact, Black Illinoisans?
Absolutely. There was also another article in Cranes that talked about the rebound of Illinois' economy and how it came back and is bouncing back stronger. And the unemployment rate in Illinois is lower than some of our similarly situated neighbors. So Illinois' unemployment rate is doing better than the state of California, is doing better than the state of New York, is doing better than the state of Pennsylvania. And that's because we are investing in opportunities and creating opportunities where others have not. Investing not just in LaSalle Street, but investing in 79th Street, investing in 87th Street, creating opportunities on King Drive, creating opportunities in business corridors where they have traditionally not been created previously. So that's where you are seeing this investment in creating opportunities for small businesses who are really the job creators, because 2/3 of all new jobs are going to be created by small businesses. So by investing in small businesses on 79th Street, on 87th Street, on King Drive, on Halsted, investing in those opportunities for businesses who are located there, we are going to see this economic recovery, one that does not leave Black people out. Now, there's a saying where it says the rising tide raises all boats. Yeah. Well, when you have Black, and that's what Black businesses are looking for. They're not looking for a handout. They're looking for the same opportunities that everyone else has. If there is a contract, Black entrepreneurs want the same opportunity to have access to that contract than anyone else has. And that's one of the, I'll go back to the pillars of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. In our economic pillar, there were specifically we built in not just the targets, but the implementation and the monitoring phases that allow for procurement opportunities for Black businesses to make sure that you don't have the ability to get out of the goals that have been set, or to say the oft repeated line that we couldn't find any qualified partners. Well, that's just not true. When I know that I talk to vendors, black vendors in professional services and architecture and construction, there are qualified vendors. We just have to make sure we're doing a better job of connecting the vendor to the opportunity. that's been our goal. That's what I have been focusing on. That's what the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus is focusing on.
Yeah. One last question, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. The status of a congressional redistricting, I know, is on the top of everybody's mind, considering that the census, that we've lost a seat, right? What is that process? And we are fortunate in Illinois to have 3 dynamic Congress people representing us: Congressman Davis, Congressman Rush, and of course, Congresswoman Kelly. Will they be impacted by this depopulation of Illinois, and how do we hold on to our representation at the federal level?
Absolutely. And Melody, don't forget Congresswoman Underwood.
My goodness, yes. I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. So we've got 4 dynamic Black members of the Illinois congressional delegation, and we did not do with the congressional map. We did not take up the congressional map during the spring legislative session, and that was based on some requests from our federal partners. I would fully expect that we will come back and have some discussions about the federal map, what the congressional map will look like, and the same process that we undertook with the state legislative maps. I would imagine we're going to take up with the congressional maps, looking at the map through a fair and transparent process, having a process and having a map that reflects the great diversity of our state. And making sure that it meets with all of our legal requirements, i.e. the Voting Rights Act. So those are the types of discussions that we'll have, and I would imagine when we return to Springfield to take up the congressional map, those will be our guiding principles.
Okay.
Now, can I jump in for one real quick second? Sure, absolutely. I think historically, I think the census is problematic because Black people have traditionally been undercounted. Through all of our census taking efforts, there are better. I mean, the census is really an imperfect science, and there are other ways to do it. But and I think even those aren't. There's no perfect way to take the census. But I just want us to all remain cognizant of the fact that Black people have traditionally been undercounted in all of the censuses here in the United States. So so we talk about depopulation. I don't really think that we will ever have the true sense of how many of us are in Chicago or in the state of Illinois.
And Melody, I just wanted to point out for the audience as a piece of political education that it's not only the congressional and the state congressional redistricting that we're worried about. Chicago is looking at a different ward map. Even my own city of Evanston could be looking at a different in some sort of redistricting. The judicial maps are being redrawn. So it's not just the United States Congress and the state Senate and the state House that's being redrawn. It's every level of government is being redrawn. So that's why it's so important that we respond to the census, that we get an accurate count, and why it's important that people participate in the local elections, which are shortly coming up. So I just thought I'd say that as well.
Yeah, with everything that was going on during the census count in 2020, I was really shocked that the country didn't do something, either recount this year, or I know it's an expensive process, right? But it's also a very important process. Attorney Cummings, that you're speaking to, right? Go ahead, Senator Sanders.
And I don't think, and to your point, I don't think it can be undercounted, or we can't discount the suppression that the actions of our former president had on the count anyway. You had a president who was actively trying to suppress individuals responding to the census. I mean, so when you go back to Brother Kimmel's point, there were undercounts built in by the chief executive of our country. So so
you mean he actually lost by probably like 10 million votes?
Yes, exactly. And that's a whole nother segment. Melody, you want me on here for a whole nother couple hours. But it's just it is amazing to me that you will see individuals try to actively put their thumbs on the scale and then complain that they weren't able to put their thumbs on the scale hard enough. So and that's essentially what we had happen from our former president. So you're right. I mean, there were, you can't say that the census is the only data that's out there and it's the best data, when we all know and we watch on a daily basis how the president would try to suppress counts and then move deadlines and do everything he could to impact the accuracy of the count, and then now come back and say, oh well, something's not right. Well, we know that there were actions taken by our former president to impact the outcomes that we saw.
And so what kind of safeguards, and I'll just open this up, what kind of safeguards can we put in place to ensure that the 2030 census is better protected, that it's more accurate, and to get more Americans engaged in the process? Because I agree with you, Professor Kimball. It was lackluster. It always is in our community, and not just in Illinois, but across this country. We're just not motivated to participate in the process, right? And so what kind of safeguards could be put in place, and how can we do this better in 2030 for better results?
I would say let's not wait until 2029. We should be looking at those ideas, and we should be looking at strategies right now. One of the key parts of the criminal justice pillar that we passed, which was called the Safety Act, which stands for Safety in Our Communities, Accountability for Law Enforcement, and Fairness and Equity in Our Criminal Justice System today. One of the key elements of that law was the end of prison gerrymandering. And it focused on counting individuals not where they are incarcerated, but where they come from, because we know that more than 70% of individuals housed within the Illinois Department of Corrections will return to the communities where they came from. So having the ability to count them and have resources go into the communities where they are, as opposed to where they are incarcerated, that's key. So we have to start setting ourselves up right now for success. And we should, as we are debriefing and taking lessons learned from the 2020 session, we should be preparing for the 2030 session right now, because there is a saying: you are either at the table or you are on the menu. And so we need to be setting the table right now and setting the menu right now, so that we understand how we are going to be effective in this moment, and how we are going to be effective taking the lessons learned from today and taking them forward for tomorrow.
Great. Let's take some audience questions. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Is that Attorney Cummings?
I was going to suggest, with all due respect to my brother, Senator L.G. Sims, we have to take the politics also out of the census. You have a lot of distrust among Americans generally, and particularly Black Americans, because the lack of work that government has done for us historically. If in understanding that the census, as I mentioned, is an important political tool to mapping and all of that other stuff. But if it's the politics are taken out of it, so as Senator Sims was talking about, the last president was actively involved in trying to suppress the census. The Republican Party was sending out documents that looked like census response forms, but that were actually fundraising tools. Yeah. So if we take the politics maybe out of that process, you might have people who are more engaged, because they don't view it as a political thing; they view it as something else.
And they're just not to beat a dead horse here, but there are these information sharing agreements between the Census Bureau and the IRS. I mean, the majority of people file income taxes, and the Constitution says we need to do a count, right? And you can really do that, to collect that same type of data off income tax returns with between IRS and the census. The problem I think we have in this country is that we take racial demographic information, which, in 10 years, I think people much smarter than I can probably determine a way to how to get that type of information. But there are more accurate ways to do it. And, sometimes, I just say trust science, and there are better ways to do it than a door-to-door count. The Constitution said nothing about a door-to-door count. It just says every 10 years we have to do a census of the population.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take some of our audience questions. This comes from Kim Delaney. She says, hi Kim. She says, my concern is that people who don't totally understand the historic long-term efforts undertaken here enter the conversation, take over and derail the momentum other folks have fought for. It feels like this has historically been the pattern. Am I misreading this? How do we protect against this happening and ensure we can capitalize on the current momentum? And I think Kim is referring to the momentum of the reparations movement. Who wants to tackle that? How do we capitalize on it? Cam, you're on a mute.
Yeah, sure, I can speak to that. Historically, a lot of progressive radical movements in this country, Black movements, have been co-opted by other forces, some within our community that are less radical and some outside of our community. In regards to the reparations, so historically, that's something we've had to contend with. In the reparations movement, we've had a lot of new voices come into the movement. Unfortunately, as Sister Dr. Delaney stated, they have not come in with an historical grounding. And so a lot of the pressures that they were putting into the movement, a lot of statements that they were putting into the movement and positions were things that we had vetted, 10, 15, 20 years ago and found them to be not sufficient to get us where we wanted to go. They were good, but not sufficient. For instance, this whole issue of a cash payment as the only form of reparations. Many have had to turn away from that. The issue that reparations must only deal with economic, the wealth gap. Many have had to turn away from that. That local reparations was not reparations. Many have had to turn away from that. But what they've done in putting forth those hard positions is distracted us from where we could have went faster if we if they'd had that historical underpinning and we could all been moving in the same direction. And so it has been a distracting element. How do we solve that? I'm in the process of theorizing right now a strategy around unification, one that would be in alignment with this time frame that I talked about, that it's intergenerational, and as well as taking into consideration the old heads and these new voices. Yep. And not all these new voices are young. Let me add that to the thing as well. And so it's intergenerational. It's looking at all of the pieces that are in the movement, how we better utilize our allies, and how to become. We're not going to move this to across the finish line unless we're unified. We have seen that historically in our struggles in this country. There has to be enough unification to actually win, and certainly we have to build that into the movement.
Mm-hmm. Is the business community doing enough to assist in this process of moving the issue of reparations forward? How can the business community get more involved, or what should the role of our business community be?
So one of the things I will, I won't name who it was, but I will boldly point out that sort of put it on blast. In our efforts in Evanston, we were working with certain financial institutions to try and see how they could help this process. And one of the asks that I plainly put out to them was some philanthropic efforts similar to what Chase committed in the city of Chicago to the South and West Side, if they would be willing to do something similar to invest in Evanston, to maybe lure developers to build not necessarily affordable housing, because that is a term of art that is very specific to a certain income level, but the missing middle is what we call it in housing terminology, where you have the average home according to Zillow in Evanston is $499,000. So you need something that's more in the $250,000, $300,000 range. That's someone who's middle class can still afford, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 80% AMI in the area. And so that's that pressure, that political will, that political pressure on the business community is probably what's going to help push them into the conversation. But making those very specific philanthropic asks, I think, also will get them at the table as well.
Because I don't think we should underestimate the point that capitalism is sometimes runs counter to social justice. So, so I think that's, again, just to echo what my brother, Attorney Cummings, was saying, I think that's going to be a little harder sell. I think what we found with large scale corporate America, in the wake of George Floyd, is that they can be pressured into it, but to do the right thing. But I think the jury is still out about how long term they're invested in doing the right thing.
Yeah. I think you're so right, Professor Kimball. And I think about what's happening with Black Lives Matter right now. I noticed that many organizations who jumped on board immediately and just infused them, right, are beginning to pull away from them. Yeah. And I think that our organizations deserve grace in this. And it's kind of speaking to what Kim was saying, is that, the founding people who've been on the front line, who are there for passion, they may not have, that's there for at the beginning stages, may not have the sophistication to get it across the finish line, but deserves grace in allowing that scale to happen, right? And the mistakes to happen before people walk away. And I think we don't get enough of that in our community, especially at times like this. So, got another question.
Well, I would just give the corporations a D-. There are, a tremendous amount of corporations in almost every city in this country that benefited directly from the enslavement of our ancestors or the Jim Crow, black codes that were in existence during the Jim Crow session that empowered and enriched those corporations. All of those corporations need to come forward at this particular time, and none of them are. So I would give the business community a D-. They moved around racial justice, as my brother stated, after George Floyd, but are silent on redress and reparations.
Yeah. I remember when Dorothy Tillman, you might remember this, Cam, was in city council, and she was fighting for that at the city level about companies that were doing business with the city and their role in slavery. And so it becomes important that we handle this not only from the business side, politically, and so on and so forth. We got another question from Adrian Stubbs. Adrian, hi, Adrian. Adrian says, what do you say to the argument that reparations for slavery could make Black people and Black families more reliant on government handouts? What specifically would be put towards educating Black Americans in order to empower them to succeed without government assistance, to provide an easier move into the middle class?
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on in that question, and I think part of it is this red herring of socialism. Right. I think that the government provides a great deal for everybody. So to say we become overly reliant on the government, well, that's kind of problematic because we're over reliant for water and social services and city services and the like. But I do hear what she's saying, and I think it's more of a version to the expansion of the welfare state. But I think that there are these proposals, and I think Cam can probably speak to this better than I can, right? But I think that there are these proposals for these tangible, creating organizations and institutions and funding Black colleges and universities and student loan debt, making it an easier path to buy home ownership, very akin to the GI Bill of the 1940s, right? There are these things that will allow Black people to move into a more equitable part in the American economy without, this expansion of the welfare state and making people overly reliant on handouts, right? And again, Cam can probably speak to this much better than I can, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so, because we have models in history. And again, to go back to the creation of the GI Bill, no one make the argument that the GI Bill made World War II veterans, Black veterans in particular, overly reliant for handouts from the state. What the GI Bill was doing. And if we think about the first public welfare system, right, for a protected class of citizens, that's the GI Bill. And that wasn't designed for us. That was designed for other types of veterans that we took advantage of. If we have a system akin to the GI Bill, that people are entitled to these things because they are American citizens, I think the whole idea about government handouts goes right out the window, because all Americans are entitled to that. And Black people, since 1567 or 1619, depending on what number you believe we first got here, right, have always making this argument about inclusion in the nation state.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so three things quickly. First, reparations is not a handout. Reparations is a payment for what is owed, what is due, and what is just. And so this is a debt that this government owes. It's not something they're giving us freely. It's the debt that they owe, and they're going to pay, and they have to pay. That's number one. Number two, the 40 acres and a mule that was promised our ancestors and actually delivered to some of our ancestors after the Civil War was not a handout either. It was a act of redress, and it was designed to make the people whole, to give them something in which they could build a life of community, a life of economic self-sufficiency. They can produce their own homes, their own food, etc., to make them whole, to give them opportunity to be whole. And so that's what we're seeking from this government: payment for crimes committed against us in a method that makes us whole. And we just explained all the things that are necessary to do that. And thirdly, there was a dissertation a sister wrote in California, I think it was in 1993, that looked at the economic benefits to this country from reparations. Recently, the Citigroup created a study, and then there was a study about the cost of desegregation in Chicago. So we're getting more and more research and data that shows that reparations benefits this country. It's not a pull down on the country, it lifts this country up. White people, Asians, Hispanics, as well as Blacks, but it must first be targeted toward our community because the debt is owed to our community, and then the rest of this country will benefit.
I mean, even to go back to the Tulsa argument, we think about that's the complete lack of the destruction of Black wealth in Tulsa. I think we can't help but posit what would Black Tulsa, what would Black Oklahoma, the Black America look like if the wealth that Black people have created historically in this country was not destroyed or stolen.
Yeah. That's powerful. Yeah. All right, we've got another question, and it's coming from Jackie Robinson Army, my dear friend. She says, this is a great discussion. You all cannot stress the importance of voting. Representation matters. The 4 pillars of the Illinois Black Caucus were critically important, but they will be diluted if we do not get the vote out, especially at the federal level. Can you all speak to what the forward-looking plans are to help move us out of the far left and far right mindset? This is a reach, I know, but this seems to be the right group to speak to this. Who wants to start?
I'll take the first crack. I think that it's important. And Jackie, hey, how are you? It's always good to see you and be with you. What's important is what I found as we were trying to get the votes to pass the 4 pillars of the Black Caucus's pillar. It was that in the Senate at the time there were only 10 members of the Black Caucus. There are 3 numbers that matter in Springfield: 30, 60, and 1. You have to have 30 votes in the Senate to pass a bill, 60 votes in the House, and the governor has to sign it for it to become law. And with there only being 10 members of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus at the time we passed the pillars, that meant we had to have 20 other members go along with us to make sure that we were able to pass those pillars. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are building those alliances, we are building those coalitions with other groups of other members, so they understand the issues that we face. But also, once we build those coalitions, it cannot be a one-off. And that's why when you say voting matters, it matters continuously, because we have to understand, back to Professor Kimmel's point, that the economic benefit which exists, and brother Howard's point about the economic benefits which exist when you hold black people back. There was a study done recently that talked about the economic penalties which exist in the Chicagoland area to the tune of trillions of dollars in economic inequities and missed opportunities because of the segregation of the Chicagoland area and racism in the Chicagoland area. So when you start appealing to people and having them understand that equity is not just, it is not only a system of doing right by everyone else, which is what we teach our children and when they're kindergartners, and we teach our children when they are babies, do unto others as you have them do unto you. That's the golden rule. But also understanding that doing right by others is sound economic policy. If you have folks who are doing the same, if you have policies that perform the same, regardless what you look like, what your skin tone is, who you love, what your zip code is, then that is true equity. And those are the discussions we have to have. So building those coalitions across organizations and across coalitions, across groups, helps us to understand that. And then to her final question about moving out of this far left, far right mentality, those strategies, the strategies that the former president implored, he was only verbalizing what so many people were believing and so many people felt. So we saw this backlash coming from the election of our first Black president, and folks were, there were some folks who stewed the entire time, the entire 8 years that Barack Obama was president of the United States. The disrespect that he endured on a daily basis. Never have I seen an individual, a member of the United States House of Representatives, a member of the United States Congress, challenge a president, yell at and heckle a president from the floor of the Congress. But that just goes back to when you are able to show that those ideas, we have to be just as boisterous in showing the power of our ideals and how they matter as the far right is. The reason that the far right was able to get as far as they did was because they were louder. They yelled, they screamed, they were not afraid to stand on tables and bang down doors. And I'm not encouraging that. I'm not saying that that's how we should do, but I am saying we have to be forceful in showing the power of our ideas and what our ideals mean and how they are good for everyone. Going back to that statement I made earlier, that saying I used earlier about the rising tide lifting all boats, showing folks that if you shut me out, it's not just, yes, you may benefit in the short term, but in the long term, it hurts all of us, because you are not going to be as profitable if you shut out my community as if you were willing to work with me and open up yourselves to the opportunities that my community which exist in my community.
And Melody, if I can touch on a couple of points that Senator Sims just brought up, in terms of the far left and far right dichotomy, that is allowed to persist because of a lack of civics education in our country. That lack of that political ignorance allows propaganda from either side to infiltrate the minds of the voters and build apathy. And the greatest example of that was the election of our first Black president, Barack Obama, in 2008. By 2010, the Republican Party, playing chess, had redistricted all of the states and local governments and had remapped everything to the point that now the House and the Senate, by the time 2012 came around, flipped. And Barack Obama was basically hitting a roadblock to try and get any sort of agenda passed, and had to exercise a great amount of executive authority in order to actually get progress, right? And so, and that was allowed to happen because people really don't understand the importance of local elections. We vote every 4 years for the federal level, but in between time, brothers like Senator Sims are up for election. Our mayors are up for election. Our aldermen and alderwomen, our Congress people in Springfield and Illinois are up for election. Our county representatives, our state's attorney is actually elected at the same time generally as the president, but everybody else is elected on these off years. And so it's important, especially when you have these every 10 years, they're going to redraw these maps, that people are consistently active in the political process and not just every 4 years.
Yeah. Okay, great. We've got another great question coming from Gerald Hankerson. And he says, to Nicholas's point, there are ongoing threats to historic Black communities due to gentrification. Example, Bronzeville, Englewood, also decreasing our count in the census. Active or potential projects, the 78 31st Street corridor near Lakeshore Drive, McCormick Place, the Obama Presidential Library. Well, wait a minute. I'll force communities to shift or move out, encouraging other communities to move in and take over. How can redistricting prevent this between now and 2030 and beyond? Who wants to take a shot at that?
Let me kind of pick up on Brother Cummings' point, because I think that we oftentimes get distracted, and we only see what's on television, and not recognizing that every election, and this goes back to Jackie's point and Jackie's question, every election matters all the time, and we tend to show up only for the ones that get the ones that get the most attention. Dr. King once said that what affects one directly affects all indirectly. So when you go back to that point that he was making in terms of the way that the maps were drawn in 2012, that has now changed. If you look around the country, there are more Republican-led legislatures than any time in our history. There are very few. Illinois, if you look at a map right now, Illinois is the only Democratic-led legislature or Democratic-led state in a sea of red legislatures. So what does that mean? That means the policies in those other states are going to be more to the right than the policies that are led here. But so when the elections come up, whether they are city council, whether they're school board, whether they are library board, we need to be participating. We need to be there and show up. And even when we don't have elections here in Illinois or in your local community, if there's an election in Michigan or Iowa or Wisconsin or Missouri, we need to go and participate. We need to go and help. We need to go. We need to show up. And what the pandemic has shown us is there are ways to participate now that we didn't have before, and we didn't think about just a year ago. You can phone bank remotely. You can do remote meetings. We have to take full advantage of lifting up our voices in this moment, because if we don't, again, we are going to be on the menu, and more specifically, our needs are going to be on the menu. I can tell you from experience that the item that is easiest to get missed is the one where the voices are not being lifted up. So if we don't lift up our voices to demand that seat at the table, to demand that place, to be able the ability to set the menu as opposed to being on it, then we won't be able to get the outcomes that we desire. So that's how, as we're looking at redistricting in 2030, we've got to start preparing. We got to start preparing for that stuff now. We got to start preparing for those outcomes right now, electing individuals to office, supporting those individuals we have elected to office who have our best interests at heart, making sure that we have individuals who are unafraid and unashamed of speaking up on behalf of the desires that our communities have, and making sure that when they do that, we protect them and we support them. Again, that goes back to the point I was making earlier about my colleagues who are not in the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, and when they took what could be considered hard votes in some of their communities, being able to explain to their communities why those are not hard votes, because equity for some means equity for all.
If I can speak to the gentrification piece just quickly. Go ahead, Doc.
I think we were on the same page, because I was going to link gentrification to reparations, because I think one of the reasons why we see, because I live in Bronzeville and I've been here about 20 years, so I've seen the demographic shifts in my community, and I can't help but think that if we had a system of reparations, of making access to jobs, access to loans, access to better education, access to organizational, if we will be having these similar conversations about having to sell grandma and grandpa's home because we can't pay the property taxes on it, or having Mary Patillo wrote this book years ago, and a number of Black sociologists were talking about gentrification, how it looked different in Bronzeville about 20 years ago, and how more affluent African Americans, more affluent Black people were moving into places like Bronzeville, right? Because they had access to this capital, because they were able to go to med school, go to law school, and get PhDs, and really to invest in the community. But as I can't help but wonder that if we had a real system of reparations to make access to capital and education more equitable, how would gentrification look, or what would it look like on the south and west sides of Chicago?
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think we need more radical policy from the elected. There's a policy initiative by Charles Barron, a state assemblyman who was a state councilman in New York. He created what is called the Barron Rule, and it kind of speaks to a statement Nick made earlier about the medium income of medium price of housing in Evanston. Well, there was in New York, many of the traditional Black communities, Harlem and others, were facing double-digit loss of Black residents, and this double-digit increase of others into the community. And Charles Barron introduced a policy where developers who wanted to develop in his community had to develop housing in accord with the medium income of his district, not the medium income of New York City, but the medium income of his district. And as a result of putting that policy in place, he had a double-digit increase of Blacks moving to East New York. And we need that type of radical legislation. There has to be a moratorium on housing above the medium income of the residents who live there. You just can't build housing, a $400,000 house, and the medium income of the residents can only afford a $250,000 house. Those are the type of policies that our elected have to put in place to ensure our communities are rebuilt by us. And of course, having the access to capital, as Dr. Kimball just stated.
And Melody, just the last point that I would add is to sort of, to the best we can, eliminate gerrymandering. So a couple months ago, I had lunch with a judge, and I got a nice history lesson on the city of Chicago and how it's not so much that Black people are leaving Chicago, is that they were sort of pushed and diffused into the various suburbs, right? Once the housing projects came down, they were moved to the various different southern suburbs and the western suburbs. And that was in an effort to try and break up that political voting block that was contained in those like housing projects. At least that was the history lesson I was given. So in looking at redistricting, then you have to look at your map. It's supposed to be based upon population. It's supposed to be congruous. It's supposed to have a balance. You have to account for that diffusion, right? Instead of narrowing it and say we're going to put all the Black people in this box, in order. I mean, which can be beneficial. Don't get me wrong, but another way to sort of protect that is understanding that we are not necessarily concentrated anymore. We're more diffuse. So when you draw those maps, you have to take into accountability that we're spread out as opposed to concentrated.
Yeah, I just like to add my 2 cents. I know I'm moderating and not a panelist, but I love Chicago so much and have been a part of it for so very long. And so when I hear conversations around gentrification, it's always because we're so unique in Chicago. You cannot find in this country a city this large where there is Black folks from 22nd to Street all the way to 280th Street, right? It's its own Black town. When they did this spoof years ago called Negro Town, we already have it, right? And when my parents first got to Chicago and they were in the Black Belt, and they were forced to shop with one another and live with one another, and the money turned over. They did well. Integration, while a great thing, did a lot to impact the city of Chicago. I tell this story. I was taking my mother goes to Mercy Hospital. I was driving her home maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I took State Street because I'm accustomed to the Dan Ryan being packed at 4:30. 5 o'clock. That used to be a person's nightmare to get on the Dan Ryan heading south, right? I managed to look up at the L that was coming by, the red line, right? At 4:53 on a weekday, and it was empty. It was empty. This is 4 or 5 years ago, right? which speaks to the fact that we're not working.
Yep.
We're just not engaged at this city at a level where we can pay for grandma's property taxes and the ways, Cam, that we used to be, right? You try to get on the red line at 453 20 years ago, and it was about to be a fight to get a seat, right? You'd have to ride all the way to 95th to come back. And so I think systematically we have been shut out of opportunity. And I'm not a conspiracy theory at all. I'm not a conspiracy person, but we have to deal with the reality of it. And the reality of it is that the Black community of Chicago has been divested in. Yes. It's been divested in, and we've got to hold people accountable. So when we talk about things like, and I love Gerald's question, when we look at all of the gentrification or opportunities that are coming to Englewood and to Bronzeville, and he mentioned the old Obama Presidential Center. And I always ask people to look at it in this context. When was the last time that anything monumental has been erected on the south or west side of Chicago?
1893.
All right, there you go.
I was gonna say the World's Fair. World's Fair, right?
It was the World's Fair, right? And you still see remnants of it. The Museum of Science and Industry is a remnant of the World's Fair, right? When you look at the grand ballroom on Cottage Grove, it's a remnant of the World's Fair. And so I understand how people get uncomfortable, right? It's fear that we often feel. So when something as huge as the Obama Presidential Center comes to us, to Jackson Park, and what will it do? Will my property values, will I be able to pay my taxes? I get it. I remember my first house I bought was on 45th and Oakenwall. And I share this story because my mother grew up on 44th in Forestville. And LG, when I took my mom to my house on 45th and Oakenwall, she got out. It was 10 market rate housing, and the block looked like a bomb had been dropped on it. Yeah. And this woman who grew up in the Black Belt turned around and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Right? But watch this, guys, within 4 years, there were 70 new homes in the area, right? And some people have said, well, what about the people who were living there? Well, you know what? If they weren't allowed to stay, and it wasn't many because there wasn't a lot of homes left. There was just nothing left. But what they were able to sell for, they got more money than they probably had ever had in their lives. And so I don't want our people to feel victimized. We have options. We have options, and we have to get in a space of empowerment around what's happening in Chicago, and we must stay in Chicago. Chicago's been a great town for Black folks. It's the model that so many use. I remember people would come here and say, wow, boy, the people in Chicago got it going on, right? And we still do with our Black eyes and things that's going on in our community. But the pride and the movement of Chicago is what causes elections to happen. A female Black senator, a female senator who became the president of the United States. It's all there. We are the center of the universe for Black folks, and we have to own that and be proud of it and just continue to feel strong around it. So I just wanted to put the explanation point on a dynamic conversation today. Professor Kimmel, Attorney Cummings, Cam, you just so dynamic. Stay on the case, brother. And Senator Sims, thank you for everything you do to look out for our people in the state of Illinois. You keep fighting. We're all rooting you on. Thank you all so much for watching this and participating in it. This dynamic conversation from reparations to redistricting. Next, you're going to see a dynamic panel. You shouldn't go anywhere, because the president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League is getting ready to talk to Rosalind Brewer. And this Rosalind Brewer is here as the head of Walgreens. I know she's going to make some big things happen in the city of Chicago. She is a dynamic CEO and a business titan. I call her a titan from the great town of Detroit, who's now in the Chi. So we're looking for her to do great things. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And continue to support the Urban League, the Chicago Urban League. It's so important to our movement here. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.